You're listening to the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, your host, Ben Eagle. Please remember to subscribe to the show wherever you are listening. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 298 of Meet the Farmers. I'm your host, Ben Eagle. Today, we're heading to the village of Stithians in Cornwall to meet Peter Green, who is a fifth-generation farmer now focused on producing beef. He's a Nuffield Scholar and the host of Cornish Mutual's Farming Focus podcast. Although he grew up on a busy mixed farm with 1,000 weaners, dairy and later beef, Peter initially followed a different road to the farm, reading physics at university, becoming a chartered accountant and working in corporate roles after time spent travelling across South Africa, Australia and New Zealand. But life changed dramatically in 2007 when Peter's parents, David and Lynn, were tragically killed in a car accident. Suddenly responsible for a 250-head suckler herd and 2 employees, Peter had to navigate loss, leadership and logistics from afar. With support from his team and employer at the time, though, he managed the situation and eventually made the difficult decision to sell the herd. Still, this wasn't the end of the story, and the pull of Cornwall never left him. In 2010, Peter met his wife Claire in London, and together they moved back to Cornwall in 2011. They married in 2013, and in 2015, with Claire's encouragement, Peter restocked the family farm with Stabiliser beef cattle. The herd is now run entirely on grass year-round, with a focus on sustainability, local markets, and selling direct through a beef box scheme. Now, Peter's also diversified the farm and also has run workshops for the Prince's Countryside Fund's Farm for the Future programme and for a number of Cornish businesses. He also continues to bring thoughtful, engaging conversations to the wider farming community, especially in the Southwest, through Cornish Mutual's podcast, which I actually currently produce alongside him with my Rural Pod Media hat on. And did I mention also that he's a dad to twins? Peter's story is one of adaptability and purpose, not only in farming, but also when it comes to people. And I think that will be clear as you listen to him today. Peter Green, welcome to Meet the Farmers.
Ben, it is wonderful to be here. There were some facts in there that I think I'd forgotten. You have really done your homework there. I shouldn't be impressed, but I am. That's amazing.
Were they all right? I need to double check that.
I think they were. Like some of the dates I struggle with. I have no idea when we moved back and when I got married. But don't tell my wife, please. But yeah, very impressive. Thank you very much for some of those prompts, Ben.
Well, it's amazing. It's amazing what you can find out. Let's go back to the beginning, I suppose, first of all. But maybe answer me this question first of all. I mean, I've known you for a couple of years now, I suppose, through the Farming Focus podcast. But for anyone who doesn't know you, what kind of person are you? Who is Peter Green? What fires you up? What inspires you? What's important to you? What would you say to that?
Wow. I'm resisting the temptation to say chilled out entertainer first. But that probably shows my age and my sort of taste in comedies. I really love working with people, and that's something which has always driven me and given me energy. My wife would say probably that I'm an extrovert, and actually that's when I sort of seem to be sort of at my best, I hope. This is a really difficult question because
it is a hard question to start with.
You're turning the torch back on me, and yeah, I'm having to really sort of to think objectively about that. But you talked about being purpose driven, and I guess that is also something that's really important. So whether that's the business here on the farm, whether that's the way that I'm trying to do things myself and sort of, conduct myself, but also it's something that we're trying to sort of get into our 7-year-old twins as well. So that's, people and purpose are definitely two big themes.
Hmm. Perhaps an easier question. Let's go to that. You are Cornish born and bred. So can you paint us a picture of what the farm was like when you were growing up in Stithians? Tell us about the village, your local area. Paint us a picture of a beautiful Cornwall.
Yeah, so that's something which is a far more comfortable area to talk about. So I'm in what would we be called granite country. So there's lots of quarries around us, and in the parish of Stithians, very few of them now are working, just a couple, but there were sort of 17, 20, something like that, working, let's say, 100 years ago. So the ground around us is pretty acidic and it's pretty well suited for growing grass. We get just over a meter of rainfall. We get pretty mild winters. I think we had 5 frosts this winter. We don't tend to get much snow now, although I can remember a bit when I was growing up. We get a lot of daffodils, a lot of potatoes, a lot of brassicas being grown around us. That's something which I've avoided. I'm not such a fan of what they would have to do to our soils to dig out the massive boulders of granite. So that's something that we try and steer clear of. But when I was growing up, we had a dairy herd which got up to about 100 cows. Dad kept the followers, and we would have a beef sweeper bull, generally a Hereford in. And I can remember keeping all these black and white store cattle on our off farm and going to market with Dad in his Morgan sports car when I was growing up in the school holidays. And I used to think that was amazing. And then I was very fortunate as well. My brother and I used to go down to my mum's parents, my maternal grandparents' farm, overlooking St Michael's Mount. And that's a different type of farming down there. It's only 20 miles from me, but sandier soils, much more cropping. So there would be real mixed farming going on. Grandpa would have maybe 5 sows. He would have 10 cows that would walk through the little seaside village of Perneathno every day. And the tourists would have to stop and would watch as we brought these cows in through the village from the different
Wow.
fields that were all scattered all over the village. You'd have 7 farms in the middle of this village, and none of the farms were ring fenced. So they all had little fields scattered in different places. And we'd have broccoli, and we'd pack broccoli on the broccoli stand ready to be collected. Just a different way of life. But I was really fortunate to experience that.
Yeah, I mean, that story in itself is just one example of quite how much farming has changed in not that long a time.
No, Grandpa had his retirement sale in 1992, and he'd been farming pretty much that way up till then. So, just over 30 years. I can vividly remember that. Just a different way of doing it.
Yeah. Did you ever imagine that you'd come back to the farm one day, or did you think that you were destined for a different path?
I probably did think I was going to come back when I was sort of 7, 8, 9. I absolutely loved working with the livestock, the pigs, but they probably all gone by the time I was about 6. So really enjoyed working with the cattle. I often joke that I didn't know what a weekend was till I was 16. We were out every weekend, like many children on farms, feeding the calves, scraping out, mucking out houses, pushing the cows out, washing down the milking parlour, and just loved it. I guess part of that was being with Dad and being part of a team, even in those early days, because we had 2, sometimes 3 people working on the farm beside Dad and my Grandpa Green. That really was my first sort of experience of it, and it was something I'd really enjoyed. But then as I grew older, Mum and Dad had encouraged my brother and I not to necessarily just come back farming. They wanted us to maybe have broader horizons, to get some experience elsewhere. There was never a don't come back to Cornwall, but there was a just don't necessarily think you need to come back farming, because that's not necessarily what he wanted us to do. I think mainly because they'd experienced how hard it could be. Farming in the 90s was pretty tough, but also I think they probably knew that both my brother and I would come back to Cornwall. So it was about getting experience elsewhere first.
Yeah. That said, I'm pretty certain, in fact, I know that you are the first physicist that I've had on the show, certainly with an interest in space.
Yeah. So maybe not what one would expect from a farmer. So physics was just the subject I was best at. I didn't know what I wanted to do after I left school. and there's lots of different areas of physics, as quantum theory, relativity, thermodynamics, but space was what I was most interested in. Not necessarily astronomy and looking at planets and stars, but what's happening between the stars and the planets. So I did a master's in space science, which included aeronautics and a module on telescope design, which was great fun. But I just wasn't as good at physics as my peers. I didn't have a real passion for it, so it was not something I was ever going to continue. By the time I'd sort of got to my third year, it was pretty clear that wasn't what I wanted to do. But I wanted to understand how companies and businesses operated, having
Yeah.
a desire to run my own. So I went in a slightly different direction. I went towards accountancy.
Yeah. That said, do you still have any sort of amateur interest in that kind of thing?
I'm ashamed to say that I don't, and I should know more.
That's okay.
I could give you a little bit of a spiel on my master's thesis, which was on gamma ray bursts, which is when supermassive black holes sort of fall in on themselves and they start emitting this gamma ray radiation like a lighthouse. But I'll stop there. I think probably
Ah,
that's about the end of my knowledge.
I think it's maybe a conversation for another time. I am currently reading, which is not bedtime reading, and I shouldn't be doing it like that, especially when I'm not planning a wedding and everything else. But I'm currently reading A Brief History of Time, which I'm finding fascinating, actually.
Yeah, I must confess that's one that I started when I was going for my university interviews. There were a couple of Richard Dawkins books and Brief History of Time, and I started them all, but didn't actually complete them. So I couldn't actually have much of a valid conversation on any of them. As you are fast finding out, Ben, I am probably not the best physicist. I'm probably more of a farmer, I think.
Yeah, well, I've only made it to chapter 3 so far, so we'll
Oh,
see
I
how
think I
that
beat you
goes.
there.
And I'm definitely not a physicist. So, anyway, moving on. You mentioned accountancy, and you ended up sort of having quite a wide ranging career in that world. But before delving into that, I'm interested in you've spent some time traveling. You're currently a Nuffield Scholar, so you're currently doing some travels. But you spent some time in South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand earlier on in life. Why those countries, and what did you do?
So I was really fortunate. I got a job on a graduate scheme, and I asked if I could defer that to have a gap year following university. And British Oxygen, BOC, who the grad scheme was with, were kind enough to say that was fine. So I'd always fancied going to New Zealand. I'd heard so much about it. You see the pictures, you read the guidebooks. And it just looked like this absolutely amazing place. And it's a fairly well trodden path. I'd never done any independent travel, so it felt like somewhere that was a bit safer just after having left university. I'm not the world's biggest risk taker, so I think that probably played a part. And I'd had friends that had been out there between school and university and then were heading out there following university as well. So you get this weight of people saying how amazing a place is and you just want to see it for yourself. With South Africa, I was really fortunate. So I've got family out there. So my brother and I went out there for a month. Saw family in Cape Town, went to Stellenbosch, Paarl, Franschhoek, just near there. An amazing place just up the coast west of Cape Town called Paternoster. And then we did a sort of safari experience hopping across South Africa all the way to Johannesburg. So stayed in game reserves, saw the whales off the coast. I want to say at Plettenberg, but don't hold me
I
to
mean,
that.
I don't know.
Yeah, just an amazing experience to see wildlife that's just completely different from our own. And what a country. I mean, they've got such amazing produce and food, and it was just a fantastic experience. Long time ago now, so just after I graduated. So what's that? 2005, 6, 20 years. So there will obviously have been changes since then, but it was fantastic to go to South Africa and then later on to go to Australia, New Zealand on my own. Brilliant.
Yeah. And talking of other experiences as well, and I mean, we talk a lot on the Farming Focus podcast about, or I should say, you talk a lot on the Farming Focus podcast about taking experience from other from other areas of life and work as well. And yeah, that podcast. By the way, listeners, please do go and check out the Farming Focus podcast if you haven't already. Give it a subscribe. Yeah. So you talk a lot about that, and we have guests on from other walks of life. You've worked in big corporate environments, which of course is on the face of it pretty different from day to day life on the farm. But I'm interested in your perspective on what the crossover learnings are and what all that experience has given you with your current hat on.
It's definitely a different environment from the one that I'm working in. There's definitely a difference in pace and a difference in the rate of change. So there are times when it's definitely easier just to get things done in a smaller business because there are fewer committees and, dare I say, as an accountant, there are fewer controls that you need to meet and jump through. There's also obviously upsides from being in a bigger business. There's more resource, there's more experience, both in and out of the business. And quite often the structures and decision-making processes can be really helpful. And actually that's an area that I'm particularly interested in, something that I always found quite valuable, this piece around how we behave as humans, and particularly in organizations. So that's something which I'm looking at a little bit more with my Nuffield Farming Scholarship at the moment, trying to understand the importance of mindset in making sure that farming businesses are successful. So this is an area which has been studied in larger businesses, particularly in corporates, but actually how can we apply that in agriculture and other food businesses, and what are the quick wins? I think that's an area I'm just starting to look into. So don't have lots of concrete answers that I can share with you right now, but that's something that's really interesting. But another part of working in corporates, which has been really interesting for me and which I've definitely taken forward, is around the importance of having a strategy, having a long-term vision. It was interesting when I went to New Zealand for the Contemporary Scholars Conference for the Nuffield Farming Scholarship, that some businesses out there, particularly the Maori-owned businesses, they're talking about 100-year strategies. You know, that's how far ahead they're planning. Now, I'm
Okay.
not advocating that for every business, but I do think there's something in having a pathway mapped out. So that's definitely something which I've taken from working in larger businesses, that organizational side of things.
So 2007 was clearly a very pivotal year for you, a lot of change. And here I'm alluding to the death of your parents. Would you be willing to share what that period was like for you personally, but also, I suppose, the professional impact as well?
Yeah, so in August 2007, I was living in Stamford up in Lincolnshire. I was on my first work placement with British Oxygen at their subsidiary GIST, doing a lot of logistics for Marks and Spencers and Morrison's, amongst other businesses. I was really enjoying that. I was getting through my exams. And then one morning, my cousins knocked on my door, and my cousins lived in Southampton. I thought, oh, what are you doing here? And they brought the devastating news that my parents had been killed the night before in a car crash back home in Cornwall. So obviously, right there, the world the world has changed for me, the way I'm seeing it. So we rushed home, and my brother had already got home from his job in Plymouth. He'd been contacted by the police the night before, and my grandparents, my three surviving grandparents, were there as well, and obviously a huge impact on them, on my wider family, so my uncle, my cousins, but also on the two employees that we had on the farm. We had 250 cattle. When Dad passed away, we had silage cut on the ground. I've been working, obviously, as I just said, in Lincolnshire. My brother had been working in Plymouth. Dad was running the farm while working part-time as an agricultural lecturer for Dutch College down here. So there was definitely a sense that things were in motion, but our world had stopped. And that was, that was a point of real challenge. The next step really was around trying to provide some continuity. I'm a big believer that change isn't something which is best done quickly. It's best done when it's done in a sensible order. So we knew we had to bale the silage, so bale it we did. We knew we had to keep feeding the cows, so we kept them fed, and that's thanks in large part to the team. So our two staff, who one of whom is still with us, 48 years in now, and they were just invaluable. So I was very fortunate. My employer gave me a 3 month leave of absence, and I was able to just stay at home and just get things sorted and put some things in place, put some systems in place, and give reassurance to our employees, but also to people around us that there wasn't going to be too much massive change. People don't like shocks. You will hear me talking about
Yeah.
change here again and again. So we did that. We kept some of the cattle, calved them down the next spring, but then we sort of sold them off gradually, so there was no fire sale, and just looked at bringing the farm back to a position where it was on tick over. And then I moved placement. I had been due to go to work in Munich on my next placement, and that had been my last conversation with mum and dad, talking about the prospect of that. But the closest location that I could get on the graduate scheme was in Guildford. So I then moved to Guildford for my next placement, and came home to Cornwall every 2-3 weekends for the next 2 or 3 years. So was remote managing a farm, and worked it like that.
Wow. And of course, I mean, succession is a subject which has been very much on people's minds the last year. But with a situation like that, I mean, had you had any sort of conversation along those lines before?
In short, no. There definitely wasn't a conversation or even an expectation that my brother or I were going to move back to manage the farm. As we've already spoken about, we were positively encouraged to get away and do something different. And at that stage, I definitely didn't know that I was going to be coming home. There was definitely, as I've suggested earlier, a draw to Cornwall. I'm a proud Cornishman, as you've alluded to, and I love Cornwall. But I wasn't desperate to be back there right at that moment in time. I was 24, and I was keen to be, seeing the world and,
Yeah.
experiencing it. So coming back to Cornwall to run a farm at that point wasn't what I was looking to do. Over time, and with aging grandparents, and my grandpa got particularly poorly with dementia, that was something which needed to happen, me coming home. But in terms of succession, I was thinking about this before we spoke, and actually, I think arguably the unplanned nature of the succession almost helped, because there were no expectations. I am in many ways incredibly fortunate, because I'm able to run this farm, and have been from the age of 24, as I've wanted to run it. And I think that's a
Yep.
really important point. It's looking for the positives in any situation. Yes, obviously, terribly challenging situation with mum and dad passing away at the same time, lots of really tricky stuff to deal with. But actually, there's no expectation to keep a certain breed of cattle, to have a certain color tractor, any of this. I'm able to make my own choices and mistakes. And there are fewer people here to tell me when I'm making a mistake, potentially, but that's why you surround yourself with good people and good networks, and why you communicate and you ask questions, and that's how you learn, and that's what I've tried to do.
Hmm. Can you remember the day that you and Claire came back to Cornwall? How did that feel?
I can remember the first time I brought Claire back to Cornwall, and I was so excited to bring her back to Cornwall. 3 weeks after we'd met, we'd met when Claire was working in the City of London. We'd actually met in the Farmers Club. I won't bore you with that story, but it's in the room where you eat your breakfast. So there'll be a few people listening to this who'll know the very room.
I know that room very well.
Yeah. And 3 weeks after we'd met, I'd said, there's a farm in Cornwall, and I'm going to have to go back there at some point. So this is in 2010. And at that point, Claire was definitely not thinking, I'd love to come too. She was enjoying her work in the City of London. She was a forensic accountant, quantifying the loss on huge insurance claims, such as the Channel Tunnel fire and things like that. And I remember bringing her home to Cornwall, and I was delighted to be showing her Cornwall. And obviously, it's a fair old trip, 5 hours from London home. So got home about 8 o'clock one summer evening, and I proceeded to give her a tour of Cornwall. And bless her, the poor girl, the last thing she wanted after a 5 hour journey was a tour of Cornwall. So I didn't necessarily start off on the right foot, but I was just so excited to show her home. And obviously, she'd come down lots of times between then and us moving back. But moving back was definitely a challenge for Claire, because I say moving back, it was moving to Cornwall
Yeah,
for
it's
Claire.
moving too for her.
Yeah, she's from Birmingham originally. As I said, working in the city of London, living in West Hampstead, enjoying life in her 20s, and then to come back to a pretty damp farmhouse 2 hours west of Exeter, without a role to go to was a real challenge for Claire. So yeah, it was an interesting baptism for her, but fortunately she wrote to Cornish Mutual speculatively and just said, this is me. Can I come in for a chat? And they had a really forward-thinking finance director at the time, who's now their CEO, Peter Beaumont, and he, together with the other senior leadership there, wanted to meet Claire and offered her a role, and that was 13, I think, nearly 14 years ago. So she's still there and really very passionate about it.
Bringing this back to farming, you began farming again with stabiliser cattle. Why them? And tell us about the process of restocking and what that was like.
Yeah, I'm really conscious, Ben. I could talk about this for a whole episode because
I
I
know you
just
could.
I love my
I'm giving you 2 minutes.
Okay, starting now. So we'd had tenants keeping their livestock on our farm, and whilst that was okay, it looked after the farm. It wasn't scratching the itch for me, and it was actually Claire, my wife, my now wife, who said, look, you just need to buy some cattle. And so I think that was the permission that I needed. As I said earlier, I'm quite risk averse, so I think I just needed that push. I looked at a number of different breeds, looked at the Angus, looked at Red Ruby Devons, but actually the Stabiliser, with their real focus on estimated breeding values, on statistics, really spoke to me. The mathematician, the physicist, the accountant in me really liked that. So we bought our first Stabiliser heifers, and the last of them is still here. 10 years later? We're calving about 25 cows. We're keeping followers. We're a closed herd. We're all fed on grass, and we've got a real focus on good KPIs. So we're looking at weaning ratios, and we're culling quite hard on fertility. So we're a tight 8-week calving block this year. We're 100% AI, and we are really trying to push them to make sure that we've got really good fertility. They're a docile breed, which we love anyway, and we want to make sure that they calve themselves. Calf gets up 20 minutes, it's sucking, and is weighing half mother's weight when it gets to the October, November, at which point we'll sell the steers and put the heifers in a shed and go from there.
We talk about marginal gains quite a bit on the show. I know you do on your show as well. To what extent does that drive you? And I'm talking about sort of the year by year process of between when you started and your system now. How many changes have you made?
So we are trying to make changes throughout the business every single year. And in my head, I guess there's two parts to the business. There's the farming operation with the cattle, and I'd be lying if I said that was a massive profit maker, but we do make a profit on the cattle. That's something that's really important to me, but also I'm really passionate about making sure that despite being a small herd and not having those economies of scale, we are operating at the top end. So when I look at the AHDB top performing herds data, I'm looking to be in the top sort of 10% if I can. In terms of gains, we're always looking at different areas that we can improve. We're getting to a point now where we're looking at our processes, the way we can improve them. So, we're recording this middle of May. I'm looking now at really pushing hard on fertility. So we're making sure that the cows are in absolutely the best shape when we start breeding on the 12th of June. So we're going to make sure we've got a vet check lined up. We're tail painting now to look for that. So it's little things like this. There's the other side of our business, which is the property side, which is where I'm trying to really build the balance sheet of the business, and I'm trying to improve the return on the capital that's employed in my business. And we're always trying to do something there every year. And they're probably less marginal gains there, and it's more sort of step changes. So every year we're trying to do a building project where we are developing another set of buildings and trying to bring them online as an additional revenue stream.
Okay. Let's sidestep to another part of your life, which came in a couple of years ago, the Farming Focus podcast. Tell us a bit about Farming Focus and what it's about.
Yeah, so I talk about sort of transitioning into my my third career. I've been really fortunate to have a really fulfilling career in finance, and I got to be a finance director for a couple of businesses there. And we had a year where the farming business here was really not performing as it needed to, wasn't giving us the return we needed. So at the moment, I'm in this phase of developing the farm, as I just touched on. But now I'm going into this third stage of my career, and that's working with other people to try and, you know, improve agriculture broadly. So, as I've already said, my wife works at Cornish Mutual. They're a southwest-based rural insurer, and they've got an incredible focus on their members, who are also their owners. Through my wife, got to know the marketing lead who heard that I'd done some student radio work at university, and they were looking to start a podcast to provide kind of timely and relevant action-based information for members. So I did a pilot. You were there to record it, Ben, and here we are, 2 years, 4 series later, and the Farming Focus podcast is going from strength to strength. We've had some real A-list guests from the world of ag, and we look to capture conversations between them and Southwest-based farmers that are really practical and got a really strong focus on tips and advice and what they can do and take away to apply on their farm. So we've also got a really strong community, which is growing with every episode. So yeah, I absolutely love those meetings. Working with people, as I said right at the beginning of this show, is something I love. So the podcast has been just great.
Yeah, it's good fun. It's a good team. And we should say it's framed as the podcast for Southwest farmers, but it's definitely relevant and should be of interest to farmers and others as well. Certainly listeners to this show. Not that I'm trying to send all my listeners over to you, Peter, but
you can listen to more than one podcast.
You can. This is what I say all the time.
There's room for more than one in your life.
There is. Big question, I suppose. I don't ask you this often enough, actually, but I mean, what have you learned from hosting these conversations with other farmers and other people in the industry? Like I say, there's been 4 series of your show so far. So what have you learned?
The individual lessons would be too numerous to mention. I think it's been noticeable how themes keep coming up. And that tells me that there are these threads that run through farming for everyone, and they change over time. You know, we're all aware of the different challenges that are affecting farming at the moment, particularly with recent government announcements. But the need to be increasingly resilient is just huge for farmers at the moment. And I know we get told this a lot, and there's a DEFRA resilience fund, and the first series of the Farming Focus podcast was all around resilience. But we are going to go through some increasingly tough times in UK ag. If we can't see that from the announcements that we're getting out of government already, I think we really need to listen harder. So that's been one of the things, that need for resilience. The benefit of working mutually, I mean, Cornish Mutual is a mutual and they are for the benefit of the member, but we see it when we talk to people in catchment sensitive groups and in small collaboration groups and who work together for Open Farm Sunday. These brilliant people who are working in ag with other people and drawing other people in and around them to this network, this tribe of farmers. we've got so much to add together. We've got so many different skills. And when we just are able to get off our farm and to work together and to address the public, then we've got so much to add. So I haven't given you a pithy one-liner there, Ben. I'm sorry. But I mean, there have been so many incredible themes coming through all the way through.
Yeah, and talking of learnings, and you've said you're a people person, you have started a Nuffield Scholarship recently. You're traveling back around the world again. Tell us a little bit about your subject and what you're interested in here as well.
Yeah, so I've been very kindly sponsored by the Food Chain Scholarship to look into the challenge of getting value from our farming story. It's a broad title, and it came from a place of being really interested in trying to improve the resilience, there's that word again, of particularly small and family farms in the UK. I feel that they have something to add. But actually, it's broadened out, and this piece around the story has been something which has come up again and again recently. And just to sort of come before that, the mindset, and I spoke about this briefly when we were talking about working in large corporate organizations. The mindset is so important as well. The businesses that are really thriving as opposed to just surviving are those where there's quite often an open or an adaptive mindset, a mindset of people that are open to change. And again, this is something that we've seen in the Farming Focus podcast. We hear it again and again in their stories. So on my Nuffield Scholarship, I'm looking to investigate further the types of business that have done well, and what lessons I can learn from them and how can I bring them home. The mindset piece extends to connection to land. And we saw that when I was in New Zealand, the farming businesses out there, they have a different approach to their land. They're willing to trade it and they're willing to move farms, but they have a real connection to their land and they take into account the context of their land, which I think is quite liberating when you come from the UK and we have an average tenure of, 150 years on a lot of farms. That seemed really liberating. And the other thing that we really noticed out there is a ruthlessness in investing in appreciating assets, trading liquid assets, and leasing depreciating assets. And that financial piece really appeals. And that's another mindset piece. But finally, there's this drive. There's this vision. They have their North Star. They know what they want to achieve and where they're heading. And that all feeds back into the mindset and the story. What's our story? Where do we see our farm? Where do we see our business? Where do we see ourselves getting to? So yeah, some interesting questions there that I'm hoping to look into.
Yeah, and also following on from that, where do we see our industry as well? I think it almost has a much broader piece, doesn't it, that goes beyond the farm gate.
Yep, it doesn't have to just apply to our own business. You're absolutely right. I wonder if farmers are really able to stop and think. I don't know if we've got the time to stop and think about where we see the industry going. We've been in a position for the last 70 years post Second World War where we are doing a similar thing most days and we are just being encouraged to produce. But actually now, more than ever in that time, certainly in the last 70 years, farming is being told we've got to change. Now, going a bit deeper into what I've been looking at, change, I think, is like a muscle. We exercise it, we get used to using it, and we get muscle memory for approaching change. But if you're in an industry that hasn't had to change an awful lot for 70 years because we've been incentivized in a certain way, and I'm talking here about the subsidy regime and everything that goes with that, then how are we going to be ready to change when we're being forced to do it like never before? When subsidy is being ripped out more quickly than we were told it would be in the first place. It's a real challenge for the industry. And when we're so deep in the muck and the bullets, how are we going to have the time to look at where we want our business to go, where we want to be ourselves, and where we want the industry to get to? So that is a real challenge.
Yeah, and this is where that C word comes in, isn't it? Collaboration, looking between those different layers within not just farming and farming communities, but the supply chain as a whole, industry bodies. How does this all come together? Communication as well, communicators media as well. How does this all actually move in a similar direction?
Absolutely. I completely agree with that point, and I absolutely endorse the need for better, clearer, more communication.
What are your ambitions for your farm, for your business, for the next chapter? You mentioned these sort of different stages of your priorities and life and business life. What are your priorities and ambitions?
Yeah, so I mean, we've got a mission on the farm to develop our family business to be attractive to others and to keep farming at our core so that we thrive environmentally, socially, and financially in our second century. Now, there's a lot in there. And hopefully, with what we're doing every day, is about being attractive to others. So when I was growing up, the farm had, as I said, or as I think you said in the introduction, we had 1,000 pigs, we had 200 cattle, we had 3 employees plus dad and grandpa and brother and I and mum keeping us all on an even keel. It was a busy, vibrant place. There was life here. There was stuff
Yeah.
going on. And when I moved back in 2011 with Claire, it was very quiet, and I felt like the soul had gone from the farm, and that really upset me. So what I'm trying to do with everything that I'm doing on the farm is just to bring back that bit of soul. And when I talk about being attractive to others, that's being an attractive place to work. That's being a customer of choice for our contractors, because I can't offer them loads of business, but I can offer them clear communication. I can offer them good terms. I can pay my bills on time. I want to be attractive to other staff because I can't go out and get loads of labor. It's a difficult thing for everyone. I want to be attractive to tenants who are looking at renting our properties. And I want to be attractive to wildlife, to biodiversity. I want to make sure our soils are attractive to little creepy crawlies. So that attractiveness is really important. We've got to make sure that everything we do is really centered around that. So that's the broader ambition. I could bore you with something about return on capital. I'm not going to do that because that's up here, and it's probably not that interesting to your listeners. But I want to have a business which doesn't just enrich the community that it sits in, but I want it to build a community, and getting the business to a point where I've got a team developed in the business that can take it on from me is I guess really the ambition.
Peter, there are so many things that I want to ask you about still, but time is against us. So we're going to have to start to wrap things up. But I will ask you the final two questions that I ask everyone when they come on the show. The first is, what would your message for the public be?
Yeah, I mean, I think these probably will change weekly and monthly as I go through my sort of Nuffield farming journey. But right now, I think it's all around engagement. So I'd really just ask that the public ask questions, and if they're able and if they can access them, talk to your local farmer, but also talk to the manager of the place that you get your groceries and ask them where things come from, and look at the labels. Why can't I get British apples in April? And it'll just be a piece around seasonality, and that's fine, but ask the questions and be comfortable asking the questions. Ask your children's school about their curriculum. Are there opportunities to get your children in front of a farmer? Can they get out onto a farm? Can they learn more about where their food comes from? I think just being ready to ask questions about our food and about where it comes from and that whole process can be really helpful. So, yeah, please do ask questions.
Hmm. And your message to farmers?
I think it's on engagement as well. So we're quite often encouraged as farmers to tell our story, and people that have talked to me about this will know that I will say, well, we've got one mouth and we've got two ears, and telling our story is great, and that's a part of it, but actually we need to be listening. We need to work out whether what we're doing is acceptable to the public, because they're ultimately the people who are going to pay us for doing what we're doing, whether it's directly by buying our products or through some sort of natural capital payment scheme. So engage with the outside, engage with your tribe, your farming tribe, engage with your market and where you're selling it to understand about your product, and engage with your team and talk to them about where they see the business going, what they see as the vision, what they see as working well, what's not working well. Just ask questions. It's just so important, and really listen to the answers.
Well, Peter, it has been an absolute pleasure turning the microphone the other way round for once and asking you some questions. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Ben. It's been an absolute pleasure.
We'll leave it there. That's it for today. A big thank you to my guest, Peter Green, for coming on the show. Thank you also for listening. Next time, I will be joined by Emily Norton and James Bolesworth for a big picture look at global food and farming affairs, trade, climate, and much more, but also the local. So what this all means for individual British farms. That will be a fascinating conversation. I hope you can join me for that. But for now, I'm Ben Eagle. This has been Meet the Farmers, and thank you very much for listening.